the most precious resource of a startup is not even cash. The most precious resource of a startup is the founder's time. 24 hours a day, you have to sleep a little. So what are you going to achieve? What are you going to dedicate that special, precious resource to?
Hi all, very nice welcome on Olium, back again. And so today I have the pleasure to be with Elie from Tomcat. Elie, very nice to have you on board.
Hi, Thomas. Yeah, I'm great to be with you today. I'm glad.
So we'll dig a bit into your past, essentially your journey to the foundation of Tomcat in 2020. So right after COVID, or like towards like the end of the COVID era. It's also like a good occasion, like to understand what you guys do, like what Tomcat is. From our previous conversation, I mean, I know you have like a very differentiated like investment thesis and different approach like to building companies and startups, which is quite refreshing, let's say, in the world of all VCs. Always interesting to have people with different approaches to venture investing. So if we can, maybe in 2 minutes to essentially set the context. Can you tell us a bit more about Tomcat and and also what's your role within Tomcat? So which you co-founded a few years ago.
Yeah, sure. So Tomcat was founded a bit more than 5 years ago, towards the end of 2020. And let's say the specificity is that Tomcat is somehow two companies in one, in the sense that we operate two distinctive business models and structures. One is is an accelerator in which we work intensely during 6 months with early stage B2B startups in France. And the second structure is a more classical one. It's an investment fund that has one very important specificity, which is this fund only invests in startups that went through the first phase, i.e. going through 6 months of work with us before we invest. So that's a big specificity that helps us, let's say, de-risk quite significantly our investments, in a sense that basically we benefit from 6 months due diligence before we invest. We started this process a bit more than 5 years ago. We have accelerated 100 companies to date. And out of that 100, something like 30 of them have moved to phase 2, which is we invest in them with the fund. And my role within Tomcat, I essentially do two things. I'm quite involved in the selection process. We will probably talk about it today, but it's a very selective process in a sense that we review 2,500 opportunities every year, and we select 25 of them, basically. And I'm quite involved in that process. And the other part of what I do is to support the companies during the 6 months. And afterwards, if we invest, of course, but during the first 6 months, I'm specialized in terms of supporting the teams. I'm specialized in everything around marketing and strategy. So basically, how do they acquire customers? What is their pricing methodology? What is their go-to-market, et cetera, et cetera.
Okay, so super interesting. I mean, talking about marketing, I mean, that's essentially most of your background. So you spend quite some time with Edenred, Cromology, and Doctolib as their chief marketing officer during COVID, if I'm not mistaken. I mean, what made you switch like from, let's say, like a more corporate, I mean, even though like we could see already like you were moving towards like more innovative, let's say, companies. I mean, what made you make the switch to say, okay, I'm leaving behind a more like corporate life with some sort of stability, etc., and essentially to embrace like an entrepreneurial journey, because you co-founded Tomcat. I mean, any investment firms is in essence and in itself an entrepreneurial project. So why did you essentially choose to switch from a C-suite role to co-found a venture platform?
Yeah, it's a very good question. And actually, it's as often in life, it's about people that you've met, and projects that are starting up, and do you jump in the train, yes or no? And in that case, the two people with which I co-founded Tomcat 5 years ago are Patrice and Jeremy, who are seasoned entrepreneurs that created a SaaS company back in 2002 or something like that, called ProWeb CE. They developed that company for 15 years, and actually I met them when we bought their business when I was at Edenred. They realized a significant exit then, 300 million euros valuation, or plus or minus. And we got to know each other. We worked together a little bit on the integration of their company with Edenred, etc. And sometime after that, something like July 2020, I was working at Doctolib at that time. I met Patrice again during a lunch, and he explained to me the beginning of the Tomcat project, which was really like at the very beginning of the thinking process, and especially let's say what is at the heart of what we do, which is giving back and sharing our experience, helping young French entrepreneurs be even more successful than they are. And when Patrice shared that with me, this idea of we're gonna help French entrepreneurs. We're gonna do it at scale. We're gonna be 100% dedicated. We're gonna be full time working on it. I just loved it, and actually it coincided with a specific phase of my professional career. I was basically 45 at the time, and I think it coincided a thinking process on my side, which was okay. What's gonna be the driving force for the rest of, or let's say for the next 5 to 10 years. And all of a sudden I realized, listening to Patrice and what he wanted to achieve with the Tomcat project, I realized that, this notion of giving back, this notion of being the sparring partner of people to help them excel, I realized actually that I had been doing this for the last 20 years. Actually, if you look back at what I accomplished during my time at Edenred, I did many things at Edenred during those 3-4 years between 2016 and 2020. But basically, the most important thing that I achieved there was exactly that, i.e., being the sparring partner of the other COMEX members, helping them, making a revolution in terms of how fast did they grow. And talking to Patrice during that lunch in July 2020, I realized how much I had been doing exactly that for the last 20 years. And basically the Tomcat opportunity was about focusing on that, and focusing on that only, doing it full time. And yeah, it's one of those moments in a career where, you look at the opportunity and you're like, yeah, I have to jump in this train. And I must say that the ride of those last 5 years has been very rewarding. Again, working with exceptional people, because to be an entrepreneur, it's something very difficult to do, very difficult challenges to overcome, and having the pleasure to work with young persons that have those skills, that have this ambition, etc., but helping them with avoiding a few of those lethal mistakes that are being made by entrepreneurs. Unfortunately, it's such a pleasure, such a realization personally, that I must say that those 5 years have been really rewarding so far.
And so you talk about like coaching, etc. So I mean, I'm sure you've learned your fair share when you were at Edenred, for example, which was like a fast-growing company, but maybe a bit more mature than what you would understand when you mention scale-up, startups, etc. But what, for example, did you learn at Doctolib, which was literally a like a hyper-growth period during COVID? So yeah, everybody inside. I couldn't go to the doctor like in person. So, I mean, those services essentially, lived through like an explosion of views, etc. And what did you learn then living through that phase, which could be super helpful for the startups you essentially coach and work with today?
I would say there are many learnings, but if I had to isolate one, it's probably, and I remember very well Stan, the CEO of Doctolib, setting such an example on that. Probably the major learning was the ability of Stan and the entire organization to prioritize brutally. really brutally, because in such specific moments where, you're turning the entire company around a product, video consultation in this example, there are so many different things that need to be done or that could be done and that could, pollute the time you have to deliver, that, having a CEO and having an organization that has such an ability to prioritize, which is basically an ability to say no to 90% of the topics. And really striking learning for me, because when I look back at the previous 20 years of my professional career that had been spent in, let's say, more mature, more traditional companies, in all those companies, everybody was talking about prioritization. Nobody was able to do it, which is the classical plague that you have in larger organizations. The brutal learning this year of 2020 at Doctolib was the ability of an organization to prioritize, to say no to many things, and the ability to look at employees and say, guys, girls, I want you to stop everything you do and do that thing, because that's the one thing that will create the most value for the company for the next 3 months, 6 months. This ability, starting from the top of the company and, rippling down the entire organization, I was really amazed. And this is really something that I use today when I mentor young entrepreneurs. I try to convey that message to them, which is, the most precious resource of a startup is not even cash. The most precious resource of a startup is the founder's time. 24 hours a day, you have to sleep a little. So what are you going to achieve? What are you going to dedicate that special, precious resource to? And what are the things? Because when you do something, you don't do something else. So what are the 9 topics to which you're going to say no to really work on something and make it happen? Major learning for me during my time at Doctolib.
Can you give maybe like 1 or 2 examples of things Doctolib had to say no like during that period?
Well, again, so if you go back to that time, so we are in March 2020. The lockdown has been declared by President Macron. The entire company is basically pivoting around video consultation, sales, marketing, tech. Everything is turning around video consultation, and there are quite a few things to be achieved on the video consultation product of Doctolib at that time, which was not self-onboardable. So quite a few things had to be done in an absolute emergency, and many company processes had to be changed. And basically, we had like 1 or twice a day, we had a crisis meeting with the top 20, 30 people of the company around the table. And I very specifically, I remember those meetings where you had very talented, hardworking people around the table saying to the CEO, Stan, it's not going to be possible. It's too much. We are not going to be able to deliver that, etc., etc. And I remember very well Stan saying, guys, you did not understand. I want you to stop everything you do. I know that you had been working on very strategic projects, very important things, blah, 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 blah. But I want you to stop everything you do and you just do that. And, those words coming from the CEO, it makes a ton of difference, because all of a sudden you have teams that are like, okay, I can really drop everything and I'm going to do one thing. And 20 of us, by the way, are going to do one thing and one thing only. So guess what? In a couple of days, you move mountains. And for me, it was it was a revolution to listen to that and to see the power of those words.
No, super interesting. And so maybe on the flip side, I mean, what did you, before you started like really spending your days with startups, what did you think you knew about the business of startup, which ended up being wrong?
That's a good question. Well, I would say something that struck me pretty quickly is, let's say, if you take your average 28, 30-year-old founder, what struck me pretty quickly is those guys, they are super talented, hard workers, whatever. However, the level of experience, of professional experience, is limited. And I did not anticipate how much this would have an impact on, let's say, the need for coaching, the need for mentoring. Because when you are 28, you've worked, let's say, 3, 4, 5 years in your career, you've probably recruited 1, 2, 3 people in your life, if you're lucky. the level of I was really struck by the impact of this limited experience professionally in terms of the mistakes that can be made. That when you have like 20, 25 years old, 25 years of experience, some of those mistakes look obvious to you. Experience has a big impact actually, and I did not anticipate. Looking from the outside, you're like, wow, those guys, they are shipping great tech. They are successful, they are growing, etc., etc. Well, guess what? They are still quite young. And if you do not surround those guys with experience, unfortunately, they expose themselves to quite a few devastating mistakes, especially in terms of hiring, in terms of people management, in terms of sales management, which is probably one of the significant weaknesses of founders in France specifically. But yeah, this is something that struck me. Somehow the contrast between the external side, which is quite shiny, there is growth, there is success, etc., and the inside where you're like, at the end of the day, they're 28, they're 30, there's still a lot that they need to learn. Whatever the amount of talent, whatever the amount of ambition, whatever the amount of hard working, there's still a lot of things that they need to learn.
And so you say this more in terms of intuitive personnel or more in terms of how you set up processes? Like, for example, you mentioned sales, you mentioned recruitment. With recruitment, you'd say it's more about like how to set up like a process to essentially identify the best? Or is it more like because they've never done it, they sit for the first time in their life in an interview and they don't really know how to essentially navigate the interview?
It's both actually, because it's both, let's say, hard and soft skills, if I may say so, in a sense that hard skills, I mean, as you said, there are not 20 different ways to be successful in recruitment. So this is pretty much hard skill and process, etc. One, but two, it's also about soft skills, i.e., okay, you have a recruitment process, that's good, but what kind of people are you really looking for? Have you thought about the precise definition of the people you need around you to be successful? Pretty much none of them have thought about that before they start their first hiring process. What are the values of my company? What is the definition of the people I need in my company? Not the other companies, but my company. What are the guys and girls I need in my company to be successful? And how am I going to find those guys and girls? And then there is the process. Then there is, how do you run an interview, et cetera, et cetera? How do you set up a compensation package? All of these things. So it's both hard and soft skills, I would say.
Okay, understood. So you mentioned the fact that saying no is a skill. As an investor, and what you mentioned, like with your selection process, you essentially spend your time saying no to people. Do you mind digging a bit more in your investment thesis and the sort of businesses you look for? So you mentioned B2B, so B2B is one criteria, but maybe to describe this more, could you explain what you do not want rather than what you essentially want? Just because, because you spend your time saying no, what are like the key things that leads to a no, essentially?
So basically our investment thesis is B2B/B2B2C, very early stage. So basically the companies that start phase one with us, i.e. the 6 months of work before phase two, which is investment. The company that start phase one with us are typically at 15, 20, 25K of MRR. So lots of SaaS companies. It could be e-commerce, it could be marketplaces, etc., but with a strong B2B color. French companies, 99% of the cases. And I would say another key characteristic is that we are looking for specific founding teams. We are looking for founding teams that are willing to be challenged. And it's not the case of all of them. And what I systematically say during the selection process when it's my turn to interview, I always tell them, out of 100 founding teams, some of them do not want to be challenged by senior people or whatever, and it's okay. It's okay. We don't work with those, but it doesn't prevent them from being successful or whatever. We work with founding teams that have this desire There's that deep desire to be challenged a little bit on how they operate, what they do, how they prioritize, et cetera, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
So coming back to your question, where does the no come from? If I start with the team side, typically, if we don't have at least one of the founders that have a very strong sales culture, it's going to be tough for us to say yes. If we have a founding team that is not frugal, by frugal, I mean, €1 is €1. And, there is this very, let's say, strong belief that we have at Tomcat. And we acknowledge the fact that, we are outliers on that dimension. But the way we look at it is, as a founding team, you should find your money with customers first. And then, if there is not enough money on the table with customers, then there are investors, and we are happy to be part of them. But that's the approach, i.e., we are looking for founding teams that have this ability to be frugal and to do a lot with not much. So if we have in front of us a team that has started their company 2.5 years ago, they have burnt 800K, and they are at 200K of ARR, we have a problem. We are not sure to say yes. So those are, let's say, founding teams. Maybe a last one on the founding team. If we have a founding team, 3 founders, 1 in Paris, 1 in Amsterdam, 1 in Marseille, we have a problem. We have a problem. We are strong believers of sleeping with your founders. Basically, we are 18 hours a day together in the same office, iterating, making decisions, et cetera, full remote teams. And again, we have the humility to recognize that we might be wrong from time to time, but our strong bias on this is full remote teams, full remote founding team. So this is for the founding team aspect, which is very important. And then, of course, we have a few other, let's say, aspects that we look at. If we have too much of a niche market for us, basically means your bottom-up market size in France is less than 100 million euros. It's going to be tough. If we have, let's say, a sales traction that is too slow, it's going to be tough. And I say sales traction as opposed to MRR, meaning that we are okay with a very small MRR. We are not okay with, let's say, a team that, you have 3 founders, 2 of them are doing sales out of 3, and let's say you have 5 demos per month. Red flag. Red flag. The sales momentum is not there. Even if the MRR is small, it's okay. But if the sales momentum is not there, we have a problem.
And so to manage an inbound of 2,500 presentations, essentially, how are you organized? Are you using AI to essentially filter the inbound?
So 2,500 is the vast majority is outbound, actually, not inbound. I would say, well, inbound is increasing since a year, I would say, because our awareness, is growing, but the vast majority is outbound. And we have, let's say, between juniors and interns, I would say we have 3.5, 4 people dedicated to find those 2,500 opportunities. So it's a lot of outbound, it's a lot of cold calling, it's a lot of LinkedIn, et cetera, et cetera. It's a lot of events as well, but the bulk of it is outbound. Yes, you're right. We are using AI more and more. We have like 10 gems on Gemini right now, and we are in the process of migrating to Claude. But typically, we use that a lot to, let's say, scrap data at scale. And basically, we now have agents that we prompted with our investment thesis, and that are able to find, typically, we did it last week, able to find, we take like a big mapping of France Digital or whatever, and the agent is able to extract out of 1,000 the 50 startups that are within our investment thesis. So yes, we're using AI more and more, but at the end of the day, we are having conversations. Out of the 2,500 per year, 1,500 of them, we have a 30-minute conversation with them, with an analyst. Out of that 1,500, 10% is coming to me. So I do 150 meetings per year. And out of that 150, I keep 75. And then I give it to Guillaume, one of our partners, then to Jeremy, then to Patrice. And at the end of the day, we have 25 per year.
Okay, so that's a lot of meeting.
Yeah.
So one other particularity, so when we chatted before, so there is also that philosophy a bit against the raise route. And as you quickly mentioned, like you are looking for people who pay attention to like the amount of money they have, like to try to spend it the right way, etc. So you almost said that this mentality of I'm starting a startup and it's going to be a decacorn and I will raise 300 million is actually not really serving the cause. I mean, can you elaborate on this a little bit? Maybe I know you gave me some stats like about US versus Europe, etc. Around like,
Yeah, I
the
think
M&A market.
it really starts from let's say an understanding of what is the French market from a VC point of view, because our approach to that, and again, we are humble people, and we acknowledge the fact that we might be wrong, but however, it's a strong conviction that we have, which is basically, starting from the market. Average exit in the US, $250 million. Average exit in France, 25 million euros. It is a sad reality, but it is a reality. Once you understand, first factor. Second factor, liquidity. Liquidity. So you're an average VC in France. Let's say you have a 150 million fund. You have, let's say, 40, 45, 50 lines. Basically, you operate the operating system of the VC operating system imported from the US, which works very well in the US, by the way, which is 40% of my lines are going to crash, and 1, 2, 3 lines are going to return my fund.
Mm-hmm.
One of the other differences of the French market as opposed to the US is liquidity. So your average VC fund in France will operate like this. It will probably have 1, 2, 3 lines with a total valuation of 1, 2, 3 billion euros, probably, but very limited liquidity. Very limited liquidity, meaning that you have almost no IPOs. I think you have 2 tech IPOs over the last 25 years in France. So almost no IPO. Limited private buyout because, well, French companies or European companies don't tend to buy startups a lot, much less than in the US. So you have very limited liquidity. So it's very nice, to have a 3 billion euro company in your books.
But you can't sell it.
It's another story to sell that company for 3 billion euros. And as you know, in VC, you have a liquidity horizon, so you have to give back the money to your LPs. So what happens is that if your liquidity is limited, your fund looks very nice on paper. You have a Alan, you have a Doctolib, you have a whatever that are valued 2, 3, 4, 5 billion euros on paper, but you don't have liquidity. So what do? You sell in secondary and you take a 50% cut, and your fund is dead. So liquidity is the other big difference. So once you understand that you have an issue of liquidity with your unicorns, and once you understand that if you exclude unicorns, your average exit is 25 million euros, well, what do you understand? You understand that if you want to be successful, you need to make money when you have an exit at 25 million euros, meaning that you have to enter at much lower valuation, meaning that you have to enter much sooner, which is much riskier, except if you spend 6 months with the founding team before you invest. So essentially, that's our approach to the industry. Mm-hmm. We enter much sooner on paper with a much higher level of risk, but we limit that level of risk by using a 6 months due diligence process before we invest. Mm-hmm. And it means that when we exit a company, if we exit at 25 billion euro, which is the market average, we are making money. And if we exit at more than 25, we do hope, and we know we will have a few companies exiting at 50, 100, maybe 200, then it's pure bonus, let's say. But if we exit at 25 million, we are making money.
Okay. And so you're saying that you are entering early, but I mean, one could argue that there are VCs out there entering even earlier. I mean, I'm not sure if it's that the case. I check. I don't know if that's the case in France, but here in
No,
the UK, you have.
your typical, let's say, high street VC, let's say in Paris, they will typically deploy between 1 to 3, 4 million euros at 10 million plus valuation. So typically, that means that if you exit at 25 million euros, you do 2x in 10 years, not so great. So we tend to enter much sooner. Typically, at the end of phase 1, after 6 months, we invest with the fund in companies that are typically at 50K of MRR. So much sooner. We know the team. So we're able to take this kind of risk, and we enter with lower valuations that
But
enable us to be
there
successful.
there are VCs like investing even before there is a product.
Yeah. So we don't do that. We don't do that. We only invest in companies. Well, we only take in phase 1, which is the 6 months period of work. We only take companies that have a product and have revenue. We don't ask for a lot. We ask for at least, let's say, really strict minimum 10K. We prefer to have 20K of MRR. So we don't ask for a lot, but we do ask for revenue, because for us, it's a first minimum proof of market fit and of ability to sell.
Mm-hmm. Oh, understood. Okay, so your power law is quite different. Like the power law, I don't know if it's too early to say, but so you mentioned 50% of the portfolio of a traditional VC, let's say, goes bust. For you, what's the
Our
proportion?
target, and so far so good, let's say. Our target is basically no more than 10% of companies that do 0x. The core of the portfolio, we expect them, as I said, to exit at the market average. And anything that will go above market average, and we do have, I would say, a couple of lines in our first fund that we know are already actually significantly above that market average. This is pure bonus. And again, the idea is when we exit at market average, we make money. But yeah, the number to remember is typically, I would not say 50, I would say 40%. 40% for a traditional VC, 40% of companies go bust or 0x. We aim for 10%, and so far so good.
Okay. And so let's say you invest in a company that starts like a super hyper growth phase where you clearly see it's going to be bigger. Like, I mean, let's say you get an Alan in the portfolio. And are you going to try to essentially exit before it reaches those levels, or what's the mentality, or do you
Well,
want to?
not necessarily. I mean, typically with our first fund, which a 20 million euro fund, typically we invest typically 6K. It can go up to 1 million, 1 million and a half, but in several times. And typically we do it on seed stage or small Series A. If the Series A is bigger, we do follow, but we have, let's say, a very minimal fraction. And that's one of the reasons we decided to launch Fund 2, to have a little bit more money, to be able to follow a bit more significantly when we have a strong Series A.
Okay.
And then our vocation is like any VC, to stay on for, let's say, 5, 7, maybe 8 years, and then exit. Either if there is, let's say, a Series B, Series C, or if there is an exit to a corporate or whatever.
Okay, so you'll try to get a liquidity event as soon as possible once you've reached essentially your
Yeah, I would
targeted
not say as
return.
soon as possible, but typically, the 5, 6, 7-year window, which is classical.
Okay, no, makes sense. And so, like, yeah, I mean, you touched base on this very quickly, but how would you describe, I mean, the competitive landscape in early stage B2B investing in France right now? I mean, you're doing something a bit different, but yeah, I mean,
Well, if you look at the early stage landscape, what do you have? You have business angels, individual business angels. Patrice, Jeremy, and I were individual business angels, and it's precisely because we have been individual business angels that we decided to move to something else, because we realized we realize two things. When you are an individual business angel, the first thing you realize is that the way you invest is not very structured. Basically, how does it work in real life? You are a business angel. You don't do outbound, of course. You receive inbound. You receive inbound decks coming from friends, telling you, it's interesting. You should look at it. So you look at the deck. You're like, yeah, it's interesting. Okay, I'm gonna meet the team in Zoom, in face-to-face, best case, but most of the cases in Zoom. 1 hour. They're gonna go through their deck. I'm gonna ask 3-4 questions at the end, and based on that, I'm gonna make an investment decision of 20, 50, 100K, whatever. So to say the least, the due diligence is limited, if you see what I mean. And consequently, when you look at performance, if you look at an average business angel portfolio, let's say 10 lines, you have 10 lines in your portfolio, 7, 8 of them die within 3 years, 2 to 3 of them are working, potentially working well. And what tends to happen is that for those companies, you're going to have, subsequent rounds of financing. Professional investors are going to come around, and basically they're going to tell you, okay, Mr. Business Angel, thanks a lot for taking risks before me. I love you for that. But now, professionals are going to take it over. So either you leave or you sign up, the shareholder agreement with all the fancy clauses. Don't look at them. It's okay. And at the end of the day, you have liquid preference, etc., and actually, on those 2 or 3 lines that have not died within the first 3 years, it's good, but it's not that good. Mm-hmm. So that's the first player. Individual business angels. They tend to be alone. They tend to have very limited impact on the companies they invest in, because an individual business angel, they have a job, they are former entrepreneurs, but they are in Saint-Tropez or whatever. So basically, they don't invest a lot of time into mentoring the company. It's 1 hour here, 1 hour there, so it's not huge in terms of impact. Second player, you have clubs of business angels, which is basically a bit more sophisticated, but essentially it's the same. Then you have incubators, accelerators, whatever. So you have many of them that are very nice structures, but in terms of intensity and density of the mentoring, let's say it's a bit disappointing. And many, if not all, the companies that join us at Tomcat, they all have been at Station F, they all have been at whatever 50 partners or whatever. They all have been in this kind of structures. But what they find at Tomcat is something different. What they find is, 5, 6 senior people, 20, 25 years of experience, drilling down the operational topics with them. And then what do you have? Yeah, that's pretty much it, in terms of really early stage.
Okay. No, makes sense. And so in terms of like VC market, so 20 VC, like the UK-based venture capital, I mean, who also has like a French partner, is producing a report on the state of VC in Europe versus the US, for example, and they are talking about the great decoupling. Essentially saying that the US is growing much more, like in terms of VC money versus France. I mean, do you think there is something specifically wrong with the French market, or it's just like this?
Well, the way I see it, one of the major differences is pension schemes. Pension schemes. So basically, in France, something around 200 billion euros go into pension schemes, or basically French workers giving money for pension. But the big difference is that a very small fraction of it get capitalized. The vast majority of those 200 million euros are being spent instantly to pay for retirement. So that's a big difference. That's a big difference, because those 200 billion euros are not injected in the economy, and especially not invested in private equity, and especially not invested in venture capital. That's the first factor I see, which is very, let's say, it's a hard factor, it's a structural factor. Then probably you have another one, which is the appetite for risk. the appetite for risk in France, I think it's fair to say, is lower. There is a lower appetite for risk. And by the way, both for investors, but also for founders, which is one of the reasons the average exit in France is only 25 million euros. Why? Because an average French founder, when there is a check of 25 million euros on the table, it's like, oh, it's too good to be true. I take the check and I run.
Okay.
As
So
opposed
just to play the devil's advocate on this, who needs to do the first step? Because if there is a problem with risk, who needs to essentially make the first step? The entrepreneur or the investor? Because essentially, I mean,
the way I
like the
see
strategy you
it is-
design, is essentially tailored on your analysis of the market, which is very pragmatic and which makes a lot of sense. But doing this is maybe preventing some entrepreneurs or businesses to take more risk.
No, I would say that's why I highlight the two factors, because the appetite for risk for me is something that is very hard to correct, to have an impact on. And even if you want to have an impact on that, you need at least 10 years. That's why I insisted on the first factor, which is the pension system in France. There you can make a huge difference, because even if your appetite for risk is low, if all of a sudden you have maybe not 100%, but let's say even, I don't know, 50% of your 200 billion euros every year, 50% of 200 billion euros every year that gets capitalized and that is invested in the economy, well, guess what? It's going to make a big difference, big difference, even if your appetite for risk is low. Because even with the current system, even with a lower appetite for risk, you still have, I don't know the latest figures, but probably 5 billion euros invested in startups last year. It's not nothing. But if all of a sudden you take 50% of your 200 billion and that gets invested in the real economy, and a fraction of that goes to startups, your 5 billion becomes 10 billion, 15 billion very, very quickly. And it's much,
Okay.
I see it as, let's say, I'm not saying it's easy to do. I'm saying it's easier to do that than to create a much higher level of appetite for risk in France.
I mean, being French also, I understand, like, technically speaking and pragmatically speaking, it sounds very simple. But I mean, we both know how difficult it is to change the retirement system and pension
but it's
system
interesting
in
because
France.
it's another way to look at the retirement scheme that we have in France. I think we vastly underestimate the punishment we give ourselves by having a retirement system that is not capitalized. The instrument of power that Anglo-Saxon countries like the UK, that the US, of course, have with capitalized pension schemes, the instrument of power that they have with that is unimaginable. So I think we give ourselves a very bad punishment doing this.
And so, sort of similar note, so I mean, France Digital is producing like a barometer like every year. The last one, I think they found that 59% of French VCs say the main break of, deploying more capital is actually the lack of a good deal flow and the quality of the deal flow. And you do also screen a lot of companies and decks and presentation, and you do outbound. So you already have a first filter because you do decide who you want to contact. It's not just 2,500 people coming to you, and maybe half of them are garbage in some way. I mean, do you agree with that view, where quality of deal flow in France is not amazing?
I would say I would have a bit more contrasted view of that. I would say we have exceptional level of engineers. I don't know if you know that, but France is number one in the world with the US in terms of feed medals. We have exceptional mathematicians in France, and we've had that for many, many years. We have very strong engineering schools in France. So we have really, really good engineers. We are not very good at sales. And when it comes to startups, when it comes to SaaS, that hurts. That's for sure. And we have a topic around ambition. Going back to what I said, the figures are there. The figures are stubborn. 25 million euro average exit. It means that your average successful French entrepreneur, when there is a check of 25 million euro on the table, they take the check. And that's the when you invest in VC, you invest minority stake by definition, meaning that you are in the hands of the founder. Whatever you can put fancy stuff in your shareholder agreement, whatever, but at the end of the day, you are in the hands of the founding team. So for me, the limiting factor, I would say, is more around, are we able to produce great tech in France? Yeah, for sure. Big time. Are we great at selling? Not so much. Are we great at ambition? Not so much. Not so much. So I see those two factors as the limiting ones.
Okay. So in your investment like thesis, I mean, why are you so much focused on, French market, etc.? I'm asking because, I mean, we spoke like recently to Augustin Sayer, you may know from OVNI Capital, where essentially their thesis is, as you rightly saw, is we have in France amazing technology, amazing researcher, amazing engineers. The sell aspect is a problem, as you said. Well, partly maybe because of culture, etc., but also because of the market. And what they are doing is they are essentially identifying great product, great tech, great engineers, and helping them go and sell in the US. And if you do this, then you are thinking, okay, like the paradigm is a bit different because we are not essentially concerned by this 25, 30 million average exit. We are playing on the other side, which means it's becoming like it's a
No, I
new
think
thing.
we look at it differently because it's based on our approach. Our approach is having an impact on the founding team. If you want to have a significant impact on the founding team, you have to know the market they operate in. And again, we are humble people. We are not going to tell a founder that we are experts at go-to-market in the US. That's wrong. We think we are experts at going to market with a SaaS in France. And our thesis, again, is we enter early, we spend 6 months, we have a significant impact on the founding team. And because that's our approach is to say, okay, it's going to be French market, which does not prevent, of course, some of our successful founding teams to sell out of France. We have, I would say, 5 to 10 startups in our portfolio that already have customers in the US. But the starting point is the French market, because our model is to have a significant impact on the team, and to know what we're talking about. Then if you have a different approach, which is more of the traditional VC approach, i.e., we give them some money, we go at the board every quarter, and we cross our fingers. Then it's a completely different story. But our approach is not that one. Our approach is we are having an impact, so we do it on the French market that we know very well.
Okay, that makes sense. And so you also have a fund, so you're raising fund 2, I think, or about 2. So you're essentially also in the business of trying to find LPs and investors yourself. How do you find the current market, raising funds? And do you think that LPs, I mean, you would tend to think that LPs are very pragmatic, etc., but aren't they looking for, VC investment? Aren't they looking for that potential extraordinary exit versus a more managed way of doing things?
Yeah.
How do you find, like, essentially your pitch? How does it fit with what LPs are looking for?
Yeah. Well, when you talk about LPs, you have to segment, because it's you have very, very different kind of LPs. Essentially, public. We are in France. Public institutions, banks, insurance, etc. Corporates, family offices, and wealthy individuals. To make it simple, we have a specific approach in the sense that not every single LP is made to let's say to work with us. Our pitch is what? Our pitch is we de-risk, we erase a significant side of the risk when it comes to VC through the approach I mentioned, i.e. We work 6 months before we invest, etc., etc. We invest much earlier, blah blah blah, and we make money when we exit at market average price of 25 million euros. But what we also provide is an ability, especially for corporates and for wealthy individuals. We also provide an ability to interact with the company portfolios. When you invest in a typical traditional VC, you write your check, and then maybe you have one dinner, one LP dinner per year, and then you come back 10 years later hoping to find your money back. Our approach is very different. What we propose is an experience. What we propose to investors is, hey, you're gonna come to Tomcat offices, you're gonna interact with the startups of the portfolio, you're gonna help them, you're gonna support them, you're gonna give them feedback, you're gonna make them intros to help them sign deals, etc. This goes as well for corporates. We have a few corporates in Fund 1 and in Fund 2 as well. What we provide them is, okay, guys, you're gonna, your business leaders are gonna come to Tomcat offices. You're gonna interact with the startups. You're gonna understand what's going on in your sector, etc. So this approach is not for everybody. So we it's something that we completely do proactively, i.e., not everybody is gonna be okay with that.
Mm-hmm.
We work with investors, whether corporate or individual, that are, of course, looking to make money doing VC, but they are looking for something else. They are looking for, interacting with the companies, understanding what's going on, meeting founders, etc., etc. So this is what we provide, and this is what the investors that come work with us are valuing and looking for.
Okay. And so you mentioned a few corporates having that sort of relationship. I mean, even there, like pressure from them on you to essentially go and identify companies that are more in that space or more in this one, because then they will find more interest, like interacting with those companies.
It works the other way around, actually. What we do is we say, okay, this is the kind of companies we invest in, and we think that 30% of them, are quite relevant for you. So it works this way. And which means that there are a few corporates that will probably never work with us because, we don't do B2C, we don't do hardware, we don't do, this kind of thing. So yeah, okay. So probably Danone will never work with us, and that's okay. However, there are plenty of companies that are B2B companies that are quite interested in in the companies that we have in the portfolio. So that works the other way around, actually. Again, and by the way, it's true for any successful business. Any successful business is a business that is able to choose their customers, and it's exactly what we do. We choose the corporates. Let's say we handpick the corporates that we approach to come work with us, and we also select among the private individuals that invest in our funds. We also select, let's say, those individuals that are attracted by this notion of having an experience, not only investing, but also having a human experience with the founders.
Okay, and so in that case, like, who is your interlocutor? Like when you speak to a corporate, like for investment, like, who will be the champion?
Usually, the CEO, the strategy team, and the innovation team, if there is a specific innovation team that does not belong to strategy.
Okay, that makes sense. Just to go back on how you coach startups, so clearly understood that selling and the commercial aspect is very heavy. I mean, you do also run some cold calling bootcamp. Can you explain what's happening during those bootcamps? I found it quite.
It's a very emblematic format of the Tomcat program, which happens every 6 months. So it's a full day. We take one entire batch. So we do 2 batches per year, something like 10, 15 companies per batch. And one of the highlights of the program is the cold calling day. So basically, we take the entire batch. So typically, you're talking about 40 people, plus some of our alumni that loved it and they come back because they want to do it again. So typically, you end up with 60 people in the room. So it's the base, the floor 0 here at Levallois in our offices for the entire day with Sarah, who is our partner dedicated to sales and sales effectiveness, etc. So for the entire day, basically, we ask them a couple of weeks before to prepare calling lists. And for the entire day, they call to book appointments, to book sales appointments. Every hour, they stop for 10, 15 minutes to debrief. What did we learn? How can we improve? How is it going? Etc. And at the end of the day, typically, collectively, they have booked something like 350 to 400 meetings. And, it's it's a very good symbol of what we try to achieve at Tomcat. Trying to teach the love of sales and the love of outbound, the love of sales prospection, etc., etc. The funny thing is that, if you take a cohort of 10 startups that go through that, every time you have at least 2 or 3 teams that, come out of that day transformed. They're like, wow, we were afraid of the phone, and now we understand that it works, Yeah, we take a few and quite a few no's, but it works. We take a few yes as well. And, every time it's the same, 2 or 3 teams are like,
So,
wow.
explain to me, because I did my share of cold calling myself, but today, I had the impression that most companies don't even have a number for reception anymore. So how do you?
Basically, you call on mobile phones and you find every
You go
single
on
mobile phone
Lucia,
number in
you
the
go
world.
on.
Yeah, you use Lucia, you use this kind of stuff, and you find like 90% of the mobile phone numbers, you can find them.
Okay, so it still works.
Yeah, it still works, my friend.
Oh, interesting. But it's true, cold calling, it's always scary. You need to do the first ones, then your ego is hurt or even destroyed, and then you don't care anymore.
Yeah, and during that day, we have a competition. So basically, at the end of the day, there is a prize for the best team, etc., and it creates a lot of positive emulation between everybody. So it's it's.
And so, do you organize other things like this, maybe to boost?
Yeah, exactly.
Confidence.
As I told you just before we started, today, as we speak, it's not a cold calling day today. It's a CTO day. So we have 25 CTOs of the portfolio companies that are sharing, their 2026 agenda, what are their challenges, etc. So there's a lot of discussion about, cloud code and what they're doing with that, etc. Plus, we invited a few seasoned CTOs to engage with them, etc. We have a few technical experts with breakout sessions, small groups, people interacting, etc., etc. And they love it. They love it because CTOs are, of course, a very important part of the founding team, and they tend to be a little bit less scared of, as opposed to the CEO, the head of sales, the CMO, the whatever. So it's the first time we do it, and we are going to do it again.
Okay.
So we have a few of those formats. We have some other formats as well that is more about one-to-one mentoring. So, for example, we have an advisor day every 6 months. An advisor day is basically 15, 20 startups, 20 CEOs of Tomcat startups that meet with 20, 30 advisors that are all investors that have invested in the Tomcat fund, and they come for one day, and everybody meets 8 to 10 people in the day. So it's a speed meeting, session, 30 minute session with 8 to 10 people during the day, and basically we match investors with startups based on their track and their experience and etc. And it's a fantastic day. Lots of business introduction at the end. So it's basically you're the CEO of the startup. You come and you say, hey, Thomas, this is what I do, what my startup does. How can you help me? I'm sure that you have a few friends that are my personas. So can you make me an introduction, etc., etc. So at the end of the day, these kind of days generate hundreds of thousands of euros of business. It's quite amazing. And we have another one where we do the same thing, but with Series A and Series B CEOs, quite a few of them being alumni of Tomcat that come back to help the younger ones, and same principle, 30 minutes speed dating. And basically the idea is for the young CEOs to come and say, those are the 2 topics that, I'm losing my sleep over. When you were confronted to those issues, when you were in my shoes, how did you handle that? What did you do, et cetera, and it works very well as well.
And so, so you coach a lot, so they learn a lot. But what did you learn about over the past, 12, 24 months working with them? Maybe ideas you had, on specific processes where you were sure, it's done like this, I've done it like this. And then you essentially realized, no, there is other ways. What have you learned yourself?
Yeah, that's the great thing about what we do at Tomcat, as in any community, because Tomcat is first and foremost a community of entrepreneurs in a community. You give and you receive, and we try to give a lot to the founders we mentor, but we also receive a lot. And the great thing, about mentoring, we have mentored 100 teams over the last 5 years. It's an incredible source of learning as well, and it's an incredible source of best practice sharing. And basically now we have mapped so many topics, so many practices, etc., that we are able. In 99% of the cases, we're able to say, "Oh, you know what? You should talk to this guy. He was exactly, facing the same problem 2 years ago, and this is how we solved it. Here is his mobile phone number. You call him and spend 30 minutes with him. And that's the power of a community. So yeah, we not only do we give, but we also receive a lot. And because we receive, we can give back again. It's like a circular process. It's quite impressive.
Okay. And so, I understood in terms of your investment thesis. I mean, you are quite cautious about those ideas of mega rounds, etc. With that in mind, what's your reading on the latest mega round with Anthropic, with OpenAI raising 100 million, with Amy Labs raising 1 billion, if I'm not mistaken? I mean, what's your reading on this?
Well, my reading is when you look at what's happening in AI, it's like a pyramid. You need a pyramid to make AI have an impact from an economic point of view, meaning that you need an infrastructure layer, you need foundation models, and then you need applications. And the way I see it is that it's exactly like a pyramid, i.e., the first floor is bigger than the second, and the second is bigger than the third. And that's the way I see it, meaning that you need to pour a lot of money into the infrastructure layer. That's why NVIDIA is worth $5 trillion. You need to put quite some money as well in foundation models. And then when you are at the application layer, it's much more frugal because of all the investments that have been made in the other two layers. And what we do at Tomcat is we tend to invest in the application layer. That's why those are, let's say, quite frugal companies. And we enjoy that because we love frugal companies. And that's why we don't play at all in the other two layers that are not frugal at all, because they need tremendous level of investments. And this is not what we do. And we have the humility to say that, we are this is not what we do.
But if it was in your mandate, I mean, would you have invested in Amy Labs? Would you have invested in the last round at Anthropic or OpenAI?
Yeah, we had the opportunity to, not with Tomcat, but let's say with connections we have with the VC landscape in France, we had the opportunity, several actually, to invest in Amy Labs, but we did not do it. At the end of the day, we have core beliefs, and maybe we are totally wrong, and we're okay with that. But no, this is not the kind of thing we do. Even
so
if we had
what's your belief?
My belief is that the probability when you invest in VC, that's the most risky asset class. All right. So meaning that when you invest, you have to invest for 10x, 30x, 100x, with a valuation of what's the valuation of Amy Labs?
It's 1 billion.
It's 3 billion. 3 billion.
3 billion, yeah, 3.5.
3 billion. So it means that you have to believe that company can be valued and exited at, let's say, 30 billion. Do I believe that? No. Maybe I'm wrong, but I don't believe that this company will be exited within the next 10 years at 30 billion euros. Then I would be happy to be wrong, but no, I don't believe it will be the case.
Okay, understood. Maybe to wrap up our chat, like a question, I'm sure I already know the answer. So you lived, different life, let's say, like professionally speaking. So corporate, as we said, like super hyper growth, scale up. Now, coaching and investing in startups. I mean, are you happy today?
Yeah, I'm very happy today. And I think the lesson here, because I think that's the interesting part. The lesson here is that throughout your career, you might, let's say, you are going to enjoy different things. And I loved managing 500 people across the world at Edenred. I loved managing 120 people at Doctolib, etc. I loved it. I really loved it. And I really love what I do now. and it would be hard for me to go back. And probably, if we speak again in 10 years, I will tell you that I do something very different again, and that I love it. And I think it's a fact of life that when you consider a career, you have to recognize the fact that at different stages of your career and of your personal life, what you expect from what you do professionally is different. And, and I think it's a fact of life that, I really enjoyed working at Edenred and at Doctolib and at large companies. And I really enjoy working in a team of 12, doing what I do at Tomcat, sharing what I learned, having an impact with tens and hundreds of entrepreneurs every year. I love it.
Well, on that note, thank you, Elie, for your time. It was really a pleasure. I mean, quite interesting to understand like your investment thesis, which is quite original and differentiated in the market. So thank you so much for your time, and all the best for the next 10 years then.
Thanks, Thomas. Thanks a lot for the opportunity, and see you soon.
My pleasure.